There's something undeniably peculiar about the way a single conversation can shift the course of your life, a truth I discovered one rainy Wednesday while scrolling through the endless threads of Reddit. The flat I rented in the heart of Chicago felt especially suffocating that evening. The sound of rain against the window accompanied my feelings of isolation, a stark contrast to the vibrant city outside that buzzed with life. As I read the post titled "Ask Reddit People Who Think All These Tariffs Are Beneficial for the US, Why?" I was quickly pulled in, my curiosity piqued, and as I delved further into the answers, I became absorbed in the passionate debates over the implications of tariffs on local markets. I had briefly studied economics in college before I pursued my dream of becoming a graphic designer, but I had never really understood how deeply these subjects seeped into everyday lives until I stumbled upon a furious response from a user named Stateless Hand. Stateless Hand was adamant that the tariffs were enriching our country, claiming they helped boost local manufacturing, a sentiment echoed by others who pinned their hopes on the recovery of long-forgotten industries. Infused with their fervor, memories of my parents' struggles ran through my head. They had operated a small apparel business downtown, one of those little family-run shops that fought to survive against the behemoths of fast fashion. I remembered countless evenings spent in the cramped stockroom, listening to them share dreams about a revitalized manufacturing sector buoyed by local trade. That part of my childhood felt like a treasure I had long buried beneath life's responsibilities, now rekindled, thanks to the passionate pleas on the screen before me. Intrigued, I felt compelled to respond, drafting carefully articulated thoughts over the next hour, combining facts and personal anecdotes into a single narrative. I shared my experience in my parents' shop and how tariffs could empower small businesses like theirs, but I also questioned the effectiveness of raising prices on everyday goods. To my disbelief, my comment gained traction. Users began responding to my reflections, others reached out, sharing their own stories of struggles within their communities. I felt something unfurl inside me, an unexpected connection, a sense of belonging created amid this realm of shared experiences. As the thread continued to grow, I found myself immersed in conversations that challenged my perspectives, ultimately stirring a mix of pride and fear, as I was both championing and critiquing a contentious subject I had once brushed off casually. Weeks passed as I continued engaging with the thread. Each comment felt like a thread weaving a larger tapestry of understanding and empathy, reminding me of how delicate our collective existence truly was. One comment stood out, however, a direct message from Stateless Hand, commending me for my perspective. Curious about the person behind the username, I hesitantly replied, and what unfolded next surprised me. We began exchanging daily messages, discussing everything from economics to our favorite Spotify playlists and, eventually, even personal matters. Their perspective was refreshingly grounded, as was the way they articulated the struggles they witnessed in their neck of the woods. They lived in a small town in Florida and described how the recent changes in trade policy had turned the local economy upside down, personally affecting their family's strawberry farm. Slowly, we moved from online exchanges to video calls, and I became familiar with the gentle cadence of Stateless Hand's voice, a balm on the digital abstraction that had initially defined our connection. However, I soon found myself wrestling with an unexpected dilemma. The more I saw into the eyes of the human behind the screen, the more troubled I felt by my initial stance on the tariffs. Our friendship deepened over shared lives, tales, and laughter, but every conversation also led to a struggle within me, as I felt more torn over the conflicting narratives surrounding our shared economics. In our moments together, it became clear how easily hearts could be caught between ideals and realities, especially when personal relationships began to weave themselves around such heavy topics. The tipping point came one evening as we video chatted. Stateless Hand was visibly upset, sharing how the local grocery store was about to close due to increased prices from tariffs, which had left the community desperate. My heart ached for them as I listened intently, feeling a whirlwind of emotions swirl within me. I dared to question the general consensus within our thread, measuring my words carefully out of respect for the friendship that had blossomed. Maybe, I began, my voice trembling slightly, the benefits of these tariffs aren't as straightforward as they seem. Could it harm more than it helps? A thoughtful silence filled the space between us, the storm outside echoing our unspoken fears. The conversation, which had once been light-hearted, was suddenly thrown into the depths of conflict and reflection. As the rain continued to pour, I understood that navigating disagreement was part of forging a connection, that grappling with different perspectives was an intrinsic part of understanding not only the world but also one another. In that moment of vulnerability, I recognized the importance of just listening, not to refute or defend, but to truly hear and find a common ground. Our discussions took on a new rhythm, blending our hopes and fears into a tapestry of understanding, one woven from personal stories and collective experiences. I'm not sure when it happened, but over the months that followed, the thread of our conversation transitioned from economics to sharing day-to-day moments, the silly selfie with my cat, or them showing off their latest harvest. With every photo exchange, we built a bridge, emphasizing our humanity amidst a sea of statistics and political discourse. By the time summer rolled around, I found myself planning a visit to their small town to meet face to face, the anticipation bubbling within me as the thought of witnessing what we'd spoken of for so long became a palpable reality. In the roundabout culmination of our journey, I came to realize how immensely important perspective can be. Through our tireless debates over tariffs, I found a friend, a confidant, and a way to understand the intricate connections we hold in our communities. When we eventually met, it felt as though we'd intertwined our lives in more ways than just a digital realm, but as friends sharing the weight of a world often burdened by misunderstanding. As we stood in the sun-soaked fields of their family farm, laughter echoing, I understood that no matter how much we differed, we were simply two humans trying to navigate an often daunting and tangled web of life. Walking side by side, I recognized that each unique voice, filled with its own struggles and joys, could amplify the sound of 1,000 unanswered questions, and together, we could find clarity in our shared complexities. And although I could never find a definitive answer to that mysterious original question about tariffs, I walked away with a new sense of purpose, to engage, embrace, and, above all, listen, because sometimes, it isn't about the answers we seek, but the connections we forge along the way. Update: a few months later, Stateless Hand and I are still in contact. We've become somewhat of an odd pair, a Chicago city dweller and a small-town farmer, but we share experiences and understanding that neither of us could find alone. And while discussions about local economic policies persist, those debates have shaped us into advocates for one another's narratives, a testament to how dialogue can unearth hidden treasures of empathy and friendship where least expected. It was a cool autumn day when I found myself sitting on the porch of my modest home, the remnants of summer fading and the leaves transforming into vibrant hues of gold and crimson. I clutched my phone tightly, lost in thought about my newfound friendship with Stateless Hand. Our conversations had shifted from local economic policies to something deeper, our childhoods, our dreams, and the life paths that led us to become who we are today. I always thought of myself as just an average city dweller, nestled in the comforting chaos of Chicago. But with Stateless Hand, I began to see the complexity behind the simplicity of a small-town life in the Midwest, the intimate knowledge a farmer had of the land, and how deeply rooted it was in community. Our video calls had become the highlight of my week, a lifeline that sought to connect the hustle of city life with the quietude of rural existence. This particular afternoon, I was waiting for our scheduled chat, reflecting on how our debates over tariffs had evolved. Where once we had argued over numbers and implications, we now shared stories of our families, our cultures, and the little things that made us tick. I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and a soft pang of longing curled within me, reminding me of the way connection blossomed unexpectedly. That longing was suddenly interrupted as my phone chimed, pulling me back into the present. Stateless Hand's familiar face appeared on the screen, a mix of excitement and sincerity lighting up his features. "Hey! You won't believe this," he started, his Chicago accent weaving through his words. "I've created a community garden project. It's not just for food, but to bring our town together after the division caused by the tariffs." Intrigued, I leaned forward, eager to pull from his enthusiasm. He described how local farmers had banded together, setting aside their differences about policy and focusing instead on a mutual love for fresh produce and community ties. Each member contributed seeds, labor, or time, and, through sweat and collaboration, they cultivated a patch of earth that had once sat fallow. My heart warmed with admiration. Here was a man who had taken the contentious conversations and transformed them into an initiative that spoke of healing and unity. I couldn't help but share my own thoughts, recalling the varied community events in the city that sometimes felt lost in the multitude of people. "You know," I said, "I've always felt a bit disconnected in the city. It can be hard to find that sense of belonging." Stateless Hand nodded, his gaze earnest. "Yeah, I think we all feel that sometimes. But what you're doing in Chicago, it's essential. Your city might feel crowded, but every single person there has a story worth sharing. We should host a virtual exchange, a mingling of our worlds." A spark ignited within me at the thought. It was a splendid idea. We brainstormed ways to make it happen, planning to connect both our communities through shared experiences. Some were outlandish, others mundane, but all born from genuine excitement: an online cultural fair, a recipe swap, stories from the field and city alike, weaving together our narratives. As our call wound down, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't expected. Yes, our discussions had begun with tariffs, numbers, and policies, but they had morphed into something profound. We'd become advocates for each other's worlds, bridging the distances that separate life paths. I reflected on how dialogue had been a muscle we'd flexed together, building strength and resilience through the words we exchanged. Those tariffs were now but a backdrop to a growing tapestry of friendship and mutual respect, threads of understanding woven together through laughter and shared struggles. I hung up that evening, content with my little project in mind, confident that our stories would soon intertwine in ways that had never crossed my thoughts. And thus, as the sun slipped below the horizon, I welcomed the stars, knowing that both Stateless Hand and I were on a journey defined not by policy debates but by the bonds we formed and the understanding we nurtured as we embraced the beautiful complexity of our lives. As I sprawled on my couch later that night, clutching my phone in one hand and a steaming mug of herbal tea in the other, I felt a comforting warmth settle in my chest. The glow of the screen reflected the enthusiasm I had for this newfound friendship. Stateless Hand, whose real name was Chris, was as much a contrast to my life in bustling Chicago as the endless fields of corn were to the concrete skyline I had known my whole life. Yet, in our conversations, layers began to peel back, revealing shared dreams and anxieties hidden beneath the weight of our respective realities. Chris often shared his tales of the farm, the rhythm of the seasons, the bond he formed with the land and the animals, and the highs and lows of harvests over the years. I listened intently, my mind painting vivid images of the sun-kissed fields and golden sunsets that he described, feeling a tug of envy for the simplicity and connection he embraced. I opened up about my life too, recounting the frenetic pace of city life, the thrum of impatience that lived in the hearts of my neighbors, and the solitude often carved by crowded public transport. Our conversations began to evolve into a ritual. Every Wednesday evening, we would schedule a video call, each eagerly anticipating the chance to share our lives. With each session, I realized just how deeply I appreciated Chris's perspective on things I had previously taken for granted. One week, as we spoke about the complexities of our economies, I shared my frustration about the endless barrage of news on tariffs and policies. Chris listened patiently for a moment, before gently interjecting with an idea I hadn't considered, the idea that perhaps, in every policy debate, there lies a community, voices seeking to be heard, struggles wanting to be shared. It sparked a light in me. We were both entrenched in our worlds, unaware of how much we could learn from one another. As fall wrapped its chill around Chicago, I found myself yearning to visit Chris and his small-town farm. I proposed the idea during one of our calls, watching as his face broke into a wide grin. "You'd love it here," he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "We're just harvesting pumpkins and planning for the winter months." The thought of stepping out of my urban existence and into a world where life echoed with the sounds of nature thrilled me. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus, the city shifting behind me like sand in an hourglass. I could feel the anticipation buzzing in my veins. When I finally arrived at Chris's farm, a sprawling landscape of earthy browns and golds opened before me, conjuring an awe that made me forget all the stress of my usual routine. He met me at the gate, his face beaming with enthusiasm and familiarity, as if we were old friends rather than recent acquaintances bound through screens and digital chats. We embraced, and it felt surreal. What unfolded over the next few days was a tapestry of experiences woven with genuine laughter, deep conversations, and moments of serene beauty amidst nature. I helped him in the fields, learning how to harvest pumpkins, and even got a taste of country cooking courtesy of one of his friends. Each evening, we'd sit around the fire pit, the crackling flames illuminating our faces as we reflected on the days gone by, how small-town worries mirrored city stress, how a failing crop could echo the financial struggles of an urban worker. As the visit drew to a close, I felt something shift within me, a deeper appreciation dawning. It was no longer just an exchange of ideas, it was a bridge spanning two worlds that often seemed so divergent. I realized how vital these connections were, much like the necessary nutrients in soil that help crops flourish. By engaging with Chris and his stories, my own life felt richer, expanded under the warmth of friendship. When I returned to Chicago, the city felt different. The streets were familiar, yet now, they were laced with the memories of a place that had changed me, even if just a little. A month later, I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and scrolling through my social media feed when I noticed a new post from Chris about a local farmer's market he was launching. The idea thrilled me, and without a second thought, I texted him, offering to help promote it through my connections in the city. It was the least I could do for the deep impact he had made on my life. Chris responded with the same enthusiasm, and suddenly, what began as an unusual conversation about tariffs transformed into a collaboration that intertwined our worlds even further, a chance to showcase local produce to a city that often overlooked its roots. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I can't help but feel grateful for how a mere online discussion blossomed into a real friendship, one filled with laughter, empathy, and a shared understanding that transcends our differing lifestyles. It isn't just about tariffs, policies, or who benefits more. It's about how we can find pieces of ourselves in one another, about constructing communities, no matter how different our environments may be. And while my journey with Chris doesn't solely revolve around economic debates, it's an exploration of life's deeper connections, a reminder that sometimes, it's the people we least expect who help us heal, grow, and truly see the world. As I contemplate the beautiful complexity of our lives, I cannot wait to see where this new chapter takes us, what new intersections we'll find along the way, and what other friendships may blossom as we continue to embrace the journey ahead. For as long as I can remember, my parents have always been strict when it comes to what I read. They believe in shielding me from the dark side of literature, books they deemed inappropriate or dangerous, which often encompassed anything that challenged the status quo or stirred my imagination too vividly. This led to an interesting internal conflict for me. While I was desperate to escape into worlds full of adventure, mystery, and, yes, even the darkness they so feared, I felt trapped under their watchful eyes. It all began one chilly autumn afternoon when I stumbled upon an old box in the attic while searching for my winter clothes. Inside were worn-out paperbacks, the covers faded and spines cracked, titles that made my heart race with excitement just reading them. 1984. Fahrenheit 451, and even the perks of being a wallflower. I couldn't believe my luck. I rifled through the pages, inhaling the musty scent of forgotten stories, my mind racing with ideas of how I could read them undetected. So I devised a plan. I would lie about volunteering times at the local community center, creating a facade of altruism while I secretly lost myself in the pages of these banned books, snatching moments at home whenever I could, hidden in the dim light of my room, thoroughly engrossed in worlds that dared to challenge the ordinary. The thrill of reading each book was amplified by the tension of nearly being discovered. I can still feel the anxiety my heart would drum up as I heard my parents' footsteps approaching my room, the panic of tossing the book beneath my bed or pretending to be occupied with homework. Every day brought a renewed sense of rebellion, and though I felt guilty for lying, the joys of reading and the new perspectives I gained were intoxicating, filling parts of my soul that had felt stifled under my parents' protective grip. However, as the months went on, my deception began to weigh heavily on me, gnawing at my conscience like an unwelcome stranger. The guilt was persistent, a dark shadow that stretched longer with each borrowed moment spent in those fictional realms while my reality lay neglected. It felt like I was double living, one life as the dutiful daughter and another as a voracious reader devouring forbidden fruit. I found myself drawn into the narratives to escape the guilt, grappling with complex characters and moral dilemmas that had me questioning the very lines between right and wrong. The stories opened my eyes wider, forcing me to confront my own beliefs, and with each page turned, I realized more about myself than I had ever anticipated. Finally, the inevitable day came. I returned home earlier than usual from my volunteering, boisterous laughter echoing in the hallway as I overheard my parents discussing a recent scandal involving a local family, something that triggered my instinct to flee, the kind of wild and uncontrollable urge to hide, to keep my secrets tucked away from prying eyes. As I entered my room, barely able to breathe, I found myself staring at the open books piled on my desk, the pages fluttering in the gentle breeze from the cracked window. In that moment of reckoning, I found clarity. It wasn't just the thrill of the stories but what they taught me about facing truths. I had built this elaborate tapestry of lies, and it felt utterly exhausting. That night, after tossing and turning, I gathered the courage to write my parents a letter, something raw and heartfelt, confessing everything, the lies, the books, my need for understanding, and my thirst for knowledge. I left the letter on the kitchen table and went to bed, feeling strangely light, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. When I woke up the next morning, my parents were waiting, and my heart raced, not with fear but hope. What followed was a lengthy conversation filled with unexpected discoveries. My parents shared their own fears about the world, how they wanted to protect me from the confusion and chaos that could come from confronting uncomfortable truths too soon. In the end, I found out that they were more open than I had ever imagined, their love for me woven tightly with their fears, and together, we discussed what I had read. I had anticipated rejection, but instead, I found a middle ground, a new agreement where we could explore literature together, perhaps even tackling some of those challenging books as a family. Looking back, it wasn't only about the thrill of defiance, it was about forging deeper connections through honesty. Now, about 6 months later, the shadows of guilt have dimmed, replaced by a deeper understanding between my parents and me, an understanding that has allowed me to step into the world of literature freely, knowing that while the stories may challenge us, they also connect us in the most profound ways. My mom even recommended a few books of her own, and I often find us discussing the very themes that used to frighten me. Sometimes I wonder, if I had never lied, would we have ever reached this point of openness? The irony of my confession becoming a bridge instead of a chasm still lingers, a perfect reminder that sometimes honesty is the doorway to liberation. And as the weeks rolled on, I found myself embracing not just the books I had once furtively devoured, but also a genuine relationship with my parents that had blossomed from my initial deception. The irony persisted like a quiet echo in my mind. What had begun as a mere act of rebellion had paved the way for understanding, empathy, and connection. Our late-night discussions started to feel more like exchanges between equals instead of the monologues I once dreaded. For the first time, I could speak freely, my tentative words met with thoughtful consideration rather than dismissiveness. My mom, whose narrow view of the world had previously felt like a cage, revealed layers I had never seen. She spoke of her own teenage years of confusion and rebellion, of the tightly bound expectations surrounding her, of books she had longed to read but felt were never provided for her. It was a two-way street, paved with vulnerability and mutual respect, and I often imagine that many parents in the world might also find themselves carrying unexamined fears and baggage that color their judgments. My father surprised me when, during one of those evenings, he pulled out a well-worn copy of 1984 from a shelf, a silent testament to his own teenage curiosity. He read passages aloud, his voice rising and falling like a gentle wave, and I sat transfixed, watching as he began to articulate thoughts he had held back for years. The stories we shared soon morphed into discussions about freedom, censorship, and the ways in which the world often seeks to bind us with invisible chains. They were discussions that blurred the lines between parent and child, inviting me to express my own thoughts about why the narratives of the past were as relevant today as they had ever been. As these conversations expanded our world, I noticed subtle shifts in my parents' demeanor. The tension that often filled the air, the silent judgments exchanged during dinner, began to dissipate, replaced by questions that probed deeper than just homework or weekend plans. I revealed, in time, my hidden treasure trove of other books, banned or otherwise, in a hesitant effort, expecting disbelief or reprimand. Yet their only response was curiosity, a desire to understand why I was drawn to those particular narratives. My parents eventually suggested we read one of my secret titles together, creating a new family tradition around literature. I chose The Catcher in the Rye, a coming-of-age saga that had once tempted me to stretch my own boundaries. The first time we sat down to read it together, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement, fully aware that we were traversing territory once deemed taboo, and I held my breath, anticipating any possible ripples of discomfort. Oddly enough, all those frayed edges yielded softness. My father's laughter during Holden's quirks and my mother sitting quietly through the emotional turmoil was strangely comforting. With every shared passage, every discerning glance or nod in agreement, I sensed the walls between us continuing to dissolve further, brick by brick. It became clear that for all the hidden chapters of our lives, honesty had acted as the ink that penned a renewed narrative for our family. Relaying my experiences became a healing process, not just for me, but for them, too. It was as if we had embarked on a literary quest together, confronting harsh truths, handling abrasive characters, and making sense of complex emotions that each book evoked. The old fears I had felt about them severing ties if I confessed turned into rays of understanding, defying any expectation. It was hard to believe I once feared their judgment. These moments of connection had become both a refuge and a revelation. We initiated a new phase in our family life centered on exploration and acceptance, each book we read together leading us to deeper conversations that demanded both vulnerability and courage. Through our shared experiences, we began to explore the world outside our home, conversing about its many wonders long after the books were closed. Months later, during a warm autumn evening, as we wrapped ourselves in cozy blankets on the porch, my heart swelled with gratitude. We shared our latest reads, each story a testament to the struggles and strengths of human experience, and the laughter that enveloped us felt as natural as the rustling leaves around us. When the conversation culminated in my unique tale of deception, I chuckled, recalling how artfully I had woven my narrative of lies. I remarked, only half-jokingly, how ironic it was that this all turned out for the best. My mom chuckled softly, a knowing smile dancing on her lips. "Isn't it funny," she mused, "how a little lie can lead to something so honest?" In that moment, as we exchanged gentle glances full of unspoken understandings, I fully grasped the power of stories, not merely as vessels of adventure or lessons learned, but as bridges built, connecting us in our humanity. For now, honesty had become our family's new currency, one that brought us closer than I ever could have imagined, and I fell asleep that night with the warmth of 1,000 shared tales cradling me, a soothing reminder of how beautifully complex and connected our lives had become. For a while, everything felt perfect, a harmonious balance in our family life nurtured through dialogue and literature. But then a curious thing happened that unfurled the next chapter of this journey. One late evening, rummaging through the attic for forgotten treasures, I unearthed an old box of my childhood belongings. Inside, I found remnants of an earlier life, old drawings, fading notes from friends, and buried amidst them, a diary I had kept for a year during my most rebellious phase. The pages brimmed with unfiltered thoughts, confessions of secret readings and deep fears about my parents' approval. Feeling a blend of nostalgia and unease, I realized that the words captured the essence of my past dilemma. They chronicled the very thoughts that had driven me to the lies. I considered sharing it with my parents. After all, the thoughts had initially shaped my deceit. But fear momentarily gripped me, a faint shadow of my earlier self-research. Would dragging those old fears back into the light disrupt the harmony we had built? After days of contemplation, I summoned the courage to share the diary with my parents. Sitting down at the dinner table, I felt the weight of history in the room, a convergence of past and present that felt very much alive. I passed the diary to my mom, my fingers trembling slightly at the thought of her reading the truths I'd buried. As she opened the first page, memories flooded back. She read quietly, her brow furrowed in both understanding and concern. I watched as she turned each page, witnessing how a simple diary could weave together those early insecurities and another layer of connection. She finally closed it with a gentle sigh, glancing at my father, who appeared equally reflective. "You know," my father spoke, breaking the silence, "this was a part of you we never got to see. I can't say I understand all of it, but I do now see how much you struggled. Thank you for sharing it with us." And in that moment of quiet acceptance, I understood that honesty, in all its forms, whether born from rebellion or vulnerability, took courage, but it also laid the foundation for deeper understanding. The past need not lie dormant in dusty boxes, but rather could be embraced as a means of connection and growth. Despite the initial uncertainty of sharing my old fears, I left the table feeling lighter, our family bond stronger than ever before. We had created a new chapter, built not solely on the foundation of literature, but also crafted from our shared experiences and vulnerabilities. Each story, whether fictional or a fragment of my truth, became a testament to our journey, endless, evolving, filled with laughter, love, and the deeper insights that accompany growing together. As I settled into bed that night, cradling the precious diary close, I drifted off to sleep with a serene heart, attuned to the quiet yet powerful echoes of connection that continued to resonate through our lives. The next morning brought with it the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls like a whispered promise of new beginnings. I awoke with a sense of peace that felt almost surreal. The weight of my secret had been lifted, replaced by an openness I had never before believed could exist in my family. As I padded down the hallway, thoughts fluttered like the pages of my books, bubbling with excitement about the conversations that awaited me. The kitchen was alive with the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of my dad's humming, a melody that had always signified comfort. My mom, noticing my entrance, looked up from her morning ritual of arranging a bright bouquet of wildflowers on the table and greeted me with a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. We sat together over breakfast, and with each bite, I could sense a new current flowing through our dialogue. My parents were no longer just the guardians of my childhood, they were becoming partners in discovery, sharing their own experiences with books and stories that shaped their understanding of the world. It felt refreshing to dive into discussions about themes of humanity, society, and the myriad emotions that literature can evoke. My mom spoke passionately about a book she had recently read, one that dealt with the struggles of inner identity, while my dad recounted his youth, the challenges he faced, and how a simple novel had provided him solace during difficult times. Their stories alternated like a harmonious dance, weaving together our past and present in a new narrative tapestry infused with honesty and vulnerability. I couldn't help but marvel at how my once solitary escape into these worlds now had the potential to deepen my relationships. As the days turned into weeks, our family dinners evolved into literary discussions, each session igniting laughter and thoughtful exchanges, where we dissected characters and plots as if they were family members we were getting to know. My parents often encouraged me to share insights from the books I was reading on my own, and I accepted this challenge with relish. The more I expressed myself, the more the barriers I had felt began to dissolve, replaced by a buoyancy of mutual respect that transformed our dynamics. I discovered a deep, collective joy in these moments, the kind that fosters a profound sense of belonging. One evening, after discussing the fine line between courage and foolishness found within a particular story, my mom turned to me, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for trusting us," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Your honesty opened doors we didn't even know were closed." Her words struck me with such weight, I measured their impact against my fears, realizing how misguided I had been to think that my concerns would render our family fragile. As I began to pen down my musings one quiet night, the diary now filled with memories and reflections, I relished the way words served as both a mirror and a window into my evolving self. I was growing, learning how to embrace the power of truth not just for my sake but for the sake of the love that already enveloped us. And while the act of deception had initially felt like a choice born of fear, the reckoning brought clarity, revealing pathways I could never have envisioned before. Just last week, we gathered in the living room to host a movie night inspired by a classic we had all read together. As the opening credits rolled, I caught my dad grinning as he nudged my mom, whispering a particularly funny line to her that had caught his fancy from the book. That shared chuckle was electrifying, a poignant moment that affirmed what we had built, a space where laughter and the wisdom of stories intermingled freely, a sanctuary for our expressions. As we settled in to watch, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, realizing that within those walls, we had created a fortress of understanding forged through the power of narrative. As my eyelids grew heavy against the backdrop of flickering images and communal laughter, I felt comforted by the thought that my journey had only just begun, that there were more chapters yet to unfold, rich with the echoes of voices we love and lessons that continue to challenge and inspire us. And in that tranquil embrace of twilight, I drifted into sleep, dreaming of adventures yet to be written together, knowing that the words would flow between us and carry us forward in the intricate tapestry of our lives. There's a saying that suggests the things we buy can sometimes end up owning us, and for years, I was a prime example of that paradox, particularly when it came to the most extravagant and frankly ludicrous purchase of my life, a rare collector's edition of a board game. I still remember the day it happened, sitting on my cramped living room couch as I scrolled through an online auction website in search of something entirely mundane, a gift for my younger brother's birthday. I stumbled across an ad for a pristine, complete version of an obscure game from my childhood, the kind that had long since disappeared from shelves, and I could already smell the nostalgic fumes wafting from that box. The board, so vividly illustrated, beckoned me to dive back into a simpler time, and before I could question my judgment, I placed a bid that spiraled far beyond what I had ever intended to spend. It was a heady rush, fueled by memories of sticky summer afternoons and the laughter of friends crowded around a dining room table, yet I virtually locked myself into a cycle of self-deception, convincing myself that this $1,500 piece of cardboard and plastic would unlock not just a trip to the past, but a way to reconnect with my estranged brother, whom I hadn't seen in years due to a falling out that seemed insurmountable at the time. When the package finally arrived, I was overcome with excitement, but that high quickly dissipated as I realized I didn't know how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us since our father's passing. Still, I forced my hand and decided a game night was in order, diligently calling him and inviting him over, convinced the game was a magical portal through which we could rekindle the connection we had lost. To my surprise, he agreed. The evening unfolded with a mix of awkward silences and forced laughter as we set up the game, the pristine board lying before us like a relic of bygone days. As we began, I could see the memories flickering behind his eyes, but apprehension crept in when I realized he was less interested in the game and more in rekindling our deeper conversation, the one I had been frantically avoiding. The joy the game had promised quickly turned hollow, and soon we were disengaged, our minds elsewhere, but as the hours passed, something unexpectedly changed. During play, the childhood banter started to creep back in, the laughter became more genuine, the stress eased, and I found myself realizing that we were no longer just brothers caught in a messy past, but two people longing for a deeper connection. The game didn't mend everything, but it broke the ice, creating a fragile space for us to talk about our shared grief and the seemingly insurmountable rift it had carved in our relationship. By the end of the night, I could see the faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. We didn't leave as best friends, but we had started taking steps back toward being brothers. Reflecting back on that evening, I couldn't help but feel That the board game had been an immense waste of money in many ways, a fleeting attempt to buy back the love I felt I had lost, but maybe, just maybe, it had been worth every penny for the door it opened to something deeper. Fast forward a few months later, we still hadn't fully repaired the damage, there was still a lot of ground to cover, but we were texting more and even planning another game night. And as for the game itself, it now proudly sits on the shelf as a reminder that sometimes the things we think are just wasteful expenses can turn into the most treasured experiences, and perhaps, the biggest waste wasn't the money spent but the years we let slip by before we faced our fears and reached out. So, in a way, that overpriced collector's edition had much more value than I originally perceived, serving not as an anchor, but as the bridge leading back to my brother, a lesson learned in the most unexpected of ways, and one I carry with me every day. As I look at the collector's edition and the joy it sparked, I can't help but reflect on how much I had overlooked in life before that moment. The gamer's console sits nestled next to dusty board games and old comic books, remnants of childhood joys, waiting to be revisited. At first, I thought my nostalgia was merely a longing for the good old days, an escapism from my daily grind as a marketing coordinator for a tech company that often felt more like a cage than a career. I buried myself in work, burying feelings of disconnection, particularly with Ben, my older brother. He was always there during those carefree days, his laughter echoing through the halls of our small childhood home, two boys sharing dreams over pixelated landscapes and stories of heroism. Somewhere along the way, life had swept us into its chaotic current, and our once vibrant bond began to dull. The whole scenario ignited a fire in me. The moment I popped the disc into my console, trepidation tinged with excitement buzzed through me. I thumbed through the instructions, which curiously reopened shadows and memories of our gaming marathons, how we'd huddled on the couch, every victory celebrated with cheers, every defeat met with contagious laughter. In a fit of impulse, I sent Ben a simple text, "Hey, remember that game we loved as kids?" I got it. The silence that followed felt interminable, yet with every passing hour, the anticipation transformed into anxiety. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want to reminisce about forgotten afternoons spent battling through virtual worlds? It was a cloudy Sunday when my phone vibrated with a response. To my surprise, it was hesitant and filled with nostalgia. "Yeah, I remember. I'd love to come over and play sometime." My heart raced at the thought of reconnecting. Preparations began, a simple cleaning of my apartment and a trip to the store for snacks. The weight of my apprehension lessened, perhaps because I knew I wasn't just preparing for a game, I was preparing for a reunion, a chance to bridge the gaps we had both let widen. The day arrived, clouds giving way to the soft glow of an autumn sun. When Ben finally stepped through my door, the air felt thick with anticipation. He looked a bit older, the kind of age that comes with grown-up responsibilities, but his grin was the same. It was a little awkward at first, small talk peppered with quiet memories, but then, as the game loaded and our avatars appeared on the screen, laughter began to pour out as easily as it had all those years ago. The screen reflected not just our characters, but the brothers we used to be, fearless and united against any challenge. Time melted away as we navigated the game's world, reliving old strategies and sharing stories from our lives, each tale reconnecting pieces of our diverged paths. The more we played, the lighter the conversation became, peeling back layers of hurt, disappointment, and misunderstandings that lingered between us like an unspoken truce. I could feel my heart swell as nostalgia danced in the air, wonder replacing the sorrow of neglected years. In that moment, no overpriced game could feel like a waste, it had become the undeniable catalyst for healing. And with every level we conquered together, we also conquered the past, transforming it from a burden into a shared journey, something to be appreciated rather than regretted. When we finally stepped away from the screen, it was dark outside, the only light coming from the moon hanging silently above us. I could sense a change in Ben, a weight lifted that he didn't even know he was carrying. We sat side by side, finishing off the last of the snacks, our earlier inhibitions gone, our laughter echoing in the cozy silence. In the days and weeks that followed, our Wednesday night gaming sessions became something we both looked forward to, a rekindled tradition. Each week, we navigated through new worlds and battled countless foes, each session solidifying our connection further. I realized, in those quiet moments of gaming and sharing, that it wasn't just about escapism. It was about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable again, to open doors we thought were forever shut. Ben and I began to share more about life, our struggles at work, relationships, and the hopes we had for the future, the laughter transforming into heartfelt conversations we had long neglected. As I now sit here recalling all of this, I recognize it wasn't just the game that was overpriced, but the years we let slip by in silence. Yet how beautifully ironic it was that a seemingly trivial purchase had sparked the most precious gift. It had led us back to each other. The lesson, indeed, was invaluable, a reminder that sometimes, in the chase of adulthood, we forget to invest in the relationships that matter most. So here I am, the collector's edition game, now more than just a forgotten relic. It's a bridge to shared moments, a reminder of how time can be reclaimed. As I hit the lights and settle down for sleep, I can't help but smile, feeling grateful for what once seemed like a waste of money transformed into a treasured investment in love and laughter. And perhaps it's appropriate that I leave this story, not in solitude but with a broader message. Sometimes it takes a little push, a reminder, a ridiculous purchase, to face our fears, reconnect, and revive the bonds that make life worth living. Update: just yesterday, Ben texted me, a simple message that brimming with excitement. Guess what? I found an old console in the attic. Let's have a retro game night next week. And as I felt the flutter of anticipation spark again, I couldn't help but think, sometimes, it's the simplest of things that remind us of the biggest joys, often hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. As I sat on my couch, my phone still warm from the recent text, I couldn't shake the anticipation swirling in my chest. Ben, my brother, and I had spent countless hours lost in the worlds of chunky pixels and vibrant retro soundtracks, our laughter echoing through the living room as we battled pixelated monsters and solved puzzles together. Those golden days slipped away, buried beneath the weight of life's demands and the silence that had stretched between us over the years, a silence that seemed to expand the longer we avoided acknowledging it. But now, with his simple invitation, a door to the past nudged open, and I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. I could almost hear our old melodies, the triumphant victory music from that one game that had always been our favorite, the soundtrack of childhood. It beckoned me, coaxing me out of my present worries and back into those carefree moments where nothing else mattered but the next level. The week leading up to our retro game night felt almost surreal. I scoured online marketplaces for vintage snacks to recreate that nostalgic atmosphere, the cheesy puffs and sticky sweet sodas we used to consume in careless abandon. With each item I ordered, I felt like I was piecing together a time capsule, a small celebration of all we had, and all we almost lost. Occasionally, I would replay our last encounter in my mind, the unspoken words hanging in the air laden with years of unshed tears and frustrations. I could hear my own thoughts, criticizing myself for letting so much time slip away even as I felt the tight-knit fabric of our bond beginning to mend, one thread at a time. Finally, the day of the game night arrived. I prepared the living room like a scene out of one of those cheesy romantic films, couch cushions tossed aside, the old console hooked up to the TV, and munchies laid out in carefully curated chaos, just like the good old days. When Ben showed up, a slight nervousness tugged at my stomach. What if the years had changed him? What if awkward silence replaced the laughter? He walked in, his eyes darting around as they landed on the setup. "You went all out, didn't you?" Ben laughed, a sound I had missed so dearly, and just like that, the tension eased. As we sat down on the floor, surrounded by the familiar scent of cheesy snacks and the glow of the screen, I felt the years peel away. We started with a game, and I watched as he instinctively placed his hands on the controller, a glint of competitive desire sparking in his eyes. I remembered this. I remembered him. We fell into a rhythm, laughter bubbling up freely as we shared stories about our lives, his exciting new city adventures and my mundane workdays, but what mattered was our willingness to share once again. I could feel the crack forming in the wall we'd built, our words smoothing the edges of misunderstandings long past. "Do you remember?" he would ask, his voice trailing off like a nostalgic melody, and I'd smile, reminding him of the time we lost our save file on a particularly hard level and how we wept for hours over pixelated losses. Hours passed as the night slipped away, each round blurring into the next, our collective laughter filling the air like music, enchanting and bittersweet. Shadows lengthened as we explored past worlds long forgotten, but every level we conquered felt like not just a nostalgic journey of pixels but the beginnings of a new era for us. At one point, I looked over at Ben as we both burst into laughter over an inside joke from a long-lost game. It brought tears of joy to my eyes. I realized that the biggest waste was never the money spent on that collector's edition, it was the regret of lost time, the bitter reality of so many moments I thought were too late to reclaim. As we finally put the games away, I felt a surge of gratitude crash over me. Ben flopped back onto the couch, his head tilted back while a blissful smile lingered on his face. "We should do this more often," he said, and it struck me as both a suggestion and a promise. I nodded, feeling the warmth of connection wrap around us, knowing that we'd let this night become a new chapter, the kind I had almost forfeited through years of silence and distraction. I finally understood the true value behind that wasteful purchase. It wasn't the game but what it led us to, the reclaiming of time, the rediscovering of bonds. How about we make a plan for every month? I suggested, my heart racing at the prospect of future adventures and memories waiting to be forged. The conversation flowed seamlessly from there, possibilities unfolding like a blooming flower. And as I got up to grab more snacks, the sound of his laughter still echoing in my ears, I felt light and optimistic, a grounded sign that the burdens of the past would not define us. Sometimes, it turns out, in the most unexpected corners of our lives, we find threads of connection waiting to be woven anew, just waiting for us to take a leap and reach out, echoing the broader message that life should be lived, explored, and above all, shared with those we love. Update: since that magical night, Ben and I have instated a regular gaming evening, retro games, new releases, and even board games to shake things up. With every session, we laugh louder and talk deeper, and on a whim, last month, we even invited some old friends to join us. Suddenly our humble living room felt like a reunion of sorts. I often think how that one impulsive purchase opened the floodgates of joy, helping us reclaim not just our relationship but the essence of what it means to share moments together. Sometimes, the things we dread, the conversations we put off, can become the brightest chapters in a story we're still writing. And while we've had our challenges, I know one truth for certain: it's never too late to start anew, one game, one laugh, one memory at a time. I spent most of my life firmly believing in the power of the little plastic bottle that sat atop my bathroom sink, an unassuming thing, really, but the promise it held was monumental. It was a miracle serum, or so the infomercials claimed, and for nearly 20 years, I swore by its supposed ability to rid my skin of every blemish, flake, and imperfection. I remember being a teenager, scrolling through forum posts late at night, reading incredible testimonials about how this product transformed lives. It was called Radiance Essence, and the blue and gold labeling seduced me with the idea of beauty, allure, and confidence. Over the years, I had fallen into quite a ritual. I'd wash my face with my favorite soap, pat it dry, and then gently massage the serum into my skin. Each application felt like a small act of self-love, believing fully that I was preemptively thwarting acne and any signs of aging. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago, when I found myself scrolling through a thread titled "What is a product that you swore by your whole life, but have only recently learned that it's essentially just snake oil?" I hesitated at first, but curiosity pulled me in. I started reading the comments, each revealing personal tales of heartache and embarrassing discoveries, as users detailed their own revelations about miracle cures that turned out to be little more than lies cleverly wrapped in shiny packages. One comment stood out starkly: "Dear God, Radiance Essence is just scented water." My heart sank as I read about someone else's life-changing epiphany, feeling as if a gut punch had toppled my entire belief system. For a moment, I sat in silence, replaying memories of all the times I'd turned to that bottle in joy and despair, when all I had really been doing was splashing water on my face. A gnawing unease began to settle in, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I remembered vividly those times when my friends would compliment my skin, and I'd credit my radiant glow to the serum. Suddenly, those moments felt hollow, tainted by what I was now beginning to fathom. Was I living a lie? The next morning, spurred by an insatiable need for answers, I pored over product ingredients and reviews, plunging into a whirlpool of information that made my head spin. The more I uncovered, the more I felt deceived: dates of patent expirations, lawsuits against false claims, customer service representatives claiming it was discontinued for formulation improvements, all signs pointing to the truth I hadn't been ready to face. The weight of realization pressed heavily on my chest. How could I have been so naive? Reluctantly, I canceled my monthly subscription, stared at the lonely vial that had been a constant presence, and placed it in a drawer, further distancing myself from what once brought me comfort. Still, in the quiet recesses of my mind, I felt a lost connection to those moments of misguided faith that had seemed to carry so much significance. It wasn't just about skincare, it was the coping mechanism in an unpredictable world, the reliable promise of a little self-improvement. I spent the next few days in reflection, exploring what beauty truly meant to me, without external validation or the dependability of a product. I began taking long walks, reveling in the gentle caress of the wind against my skin, committing to nourishing my body from within by drinking more water, eating wholesome foods, and practicing gratitude for what I had. As the weeks flowed smoothly past like a gentle river, I noticed a shift in my perception not only of myself but also of the world around me. I began to see beauty in simplicity, a smile from a stranger, the colors of sunset streaking the sky, the fleeting joys of each new day. I found a community of people who, too, had awakened to the idea that beauty rituals come in many forms, and that self-love went beyond the confines of a bottle. In sharing my experience, I discovered many felt the same. Many had been struck by the realization of placing too much faith in superficial enhancements and were now embracing their authentic selves. In that exchange, I felt a relief wash over me, a sense of solidarity. My vulnerability had woven a new thread in the fabric of my life's journey, and I began to appreciate the skin I was in, blemishes and all. As I closed the chapter on my reliance on radiance essence, I felt free, able to define beauty on my own terms, which felt, in many ways, far richer than anything that could be bought in a bottle. Several weeks later, I decided to revisit the thread that had triggered this incredible transformation. Scrolling through the responses again, I felt a sense of gratitude for the moment of clarity I had received. Tucked away amongst the confessions was an update from the original poster. It's wild how many of us are waking up to the truth of our perceived flaws. I started a support group for skin positivity. Inspiration washed over me, and with a deep, calm breath, I felt inclined to share my story, offering not just my confession but also a glimpse of hope to anyone still held captive by their expectations. I submitted my thoughts with a smile, grateful for a community that had propelled me into rediscovering myself. As I hit send, I understood that true radiance was found not in a bottle, but in the acceptance of our own beautifully imperfect selves. As I release my thoughts into the void of cyberspace, a wave of relief washes over me, like stepping out into sunlight after being trapped in shadow for too long. In that moment, it felt as if the weight of years spent hiding behind the veneer of flawless skin was finally lifting. I had spent so much of my life obsessed with concealers, serums, and exfoliants, believing that each product was a step towards some unattainable ideal, some version of myself that others would deem worthy. But the idea that I could simply shed those expectations, that I could unfold my story and share it with others, filled me with a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in ages. With each day, I found that I was embracing my natural texture, the small scars from teenage battles, the laugh lines etched into my face with joy over the years. They were all markers of my journey, not imperfections to hide. As days turned into weeks, I kept returning to that online forum, and with each post I read, I felt more connected to the stories of others who had also donned the mask society had pressed upon us. One member, Tara, shared her experiences with severe acne throughout high school, how she would meticulously cover her skin in thick layers of makeup that often made things worse rather than better. Reading her words struck a chord, echoing my own past struggles. It was reassuring to know that I wasn't alone in this. We messaged back and forth, and soon we were part of a small group that would meet virtually every weekend. Each call was filled with laughter, sharing anecdotes about the ridiculous things we used to believe, the products that failed to deliver on their promises, and the crazy lengths we went to in pursuit of that elusive perfect skin. As much as I cherished these connections, one Friday evening, I found myself grappling with a sudden bout of anxiety. I had been invited to a friend's birthday party, an event that would surely feature ample photographs and the inevitable aspect of being scrutinized by those playful fingers ready to brandish their phones. I had not fully surrendered my fear of judgment. As I prepared for the party, staring in the mirror, the familiar tug at my self-assurance emerged. My reflection seemed to scream at me, urging me to conform, to cover up what I had ownership over only weeks prior. But then I remembered the mantra I had stumbled upon in our group: your worth is not determined by your skin. The phrase resonated with me. I let my gaze soften, recognizing the contours of my face, the little dimples and freckles that I had once deemed flaws. With a deep breath, I decided I wouldn't apply anything more than my light moisturizer. Instead, I opted for a dash of mascara and a swipe of lip gloss to hint at the vibrant person beneath the careful layers I had worn for so long. At the party, the first few moments felt like an eternity, a tightrope walk between the comfortable and the vulnerable. My pulse quickened as I navigated through the gathering, but then something surprising happened. I found joy bubbling within me, laughing and sharing stories, feeling an ease in being simply present without the expectation of a flawless facade. When a friend asked to take a candid photo of our ridiculous dance moves, I instinctively fell into place, muscles relaxing as I realized I was no longer shackled by the need to appear perfect. Afterward, scrolling through the photos, I felt a bittersweet pang of nostalgia for that person I used to be, lost among the mirrored reflections and idealized images. Yet, As I examined my own image, bare and real, I saw not just imperfections but life, vibrancy, and authenticity, a celebration of who I was, an unfiltered moment among friends. That night, I posted one of those photos on my feed, accompanied by a heartfelt caption about embracing our true selves and the beauty of vulnerability. The response surprised me. Comments poured in, expressing admiration, sharing their own struggles, and supporting my newfound stance against unrealistic beauty standards. It felt as if my story resonated beyond outlines of skin and into deeper connections of understanding and care. Encouraged, I kept sharing my journey, my learning, my mishaps, and the small victories I celebrated. It wasn't just about my skin anymore, it became a movement of sorts, one where we all stood unified in our imperfections, refusing the dictation of what beauty should be. Reflecting back on the origins of my journey, I felt a sense of pride to have transformed what once held me captive into a beacon of hope for others. As I stand here, full circle and radiant in my own way, I realize that rediscovering oneself is an ongoing journey, one where each wave of self-acceptance washes away the remnants of past insecurities. And while I still have days of doubt, they do not define me. What carries me forward is the community we've built together, a tapestry of imperfections woven into something beautiful, accompanied by the unwavering belief that true radiance is born from love, love for ourselves, our stories, and every scar that has shaped who we are. Update: I've gone on to lead a series of local workshops on self-acceptance, and much to my delight, I have connected through these events with even more incredible people, each of whom has contributed to this beautiful circle of empowerment. We've recently started a project to create a zine that collects our stories, a testament that we can turn our struggles into art and connection. I'm excited for what the future holds and grateful for all the paths that have converged to lead me to this moment. Every day, I keep reminding myself, our stories matter, and in sharing them, we gift others the courage to embrace their own journey. As I sat in my cozy nook, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights and the comforting scent of lavender candles, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was in this space where I often found solace, a retreat from the chaos of the world, where I could reflect on my journey and the transformative power of vulnerability. The zine project was now well underway, and every meeting with the group filled me with purpose, each member adding their unique voice into the tapestry we were weaving. I remembered our first gathering, how tentative we all were, exchanging nervous glances as we shared our stories of hurt and self-doubt. I had spoken about my long-term relationship with the so-called miracle cream I had religiously applied since my teenage years, convinced it would one day bring me the flawless skin I had always coveted. The room had filled with laughter and knowing nods when one brave soul shared her own tale of a $30 jar of liquid confidence, which had only caused breakouts and added to her insecurities rather than erasing them. Each shared experience was like peeling back layers of skin. We laid bare our raw emotions, exposing the scars left by the beauty industry's tall tales. With every story, we found connection, laughter, and healing, understanding we were not alone in our struggles. After a few months, when the first draft of our zine was completed, I felt a flutter of excitement deep in my chest. We had decided to host a small launch party at a local cafe, where we would not only unveil our work but also celebrate our collective empowerment. As the day approached, the air buzzed with anticipation. I could already picture the small crowd of supportive friends, family, and even a few local journalists who had expressed interest in our project. With our contributions in hand, we prepared to share our journeys not just as isolated individuals but as a unified chorus echoing the message of self-acceptance. And so, the day finally arrived, clear skies overhead, and the cafe transformed into a vibrant sanctuary of our stories. People mingled, sipping lavender lemonades and munching on tiny pastries adorned with edible flowers as I set up our makeshift display in the corner. My heart raced, but it also danced with joy to see the enthusiasm in my friends' eyes. As the moment approached, we gathered everyone's attention, our nerves giving way to exhilaration. One by one, we read excerpts from our zine, sharing not only our struggles but also the lessons we had learned along the way. Each word met with applause, and I could see tears and smiles exchanged throughout the audience, a visceral reminder of the power of our truths. I felt a profound connection that night, where the journey was not about selling a solution but about embracing our imperfections. We ended the night with an open mic, inviting others to share their stories, our circle expanding to include new voices in need of a platform. As I stepped away from the cafe, the air kissed my skin, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I had come to terms with my past obsession with beauty products that never delivered, but somehow, I had transitioned that pain into a pathway for healing, not just for myself but for others too. With a sense of fulfillment growing inside of me, I decided to launch a monthly podcast that would allow even more people to share their journeys. I envisioned deep conversations, laughter, and moments of vulnerability where we could all learn from each other's experiences. And in the stillness of that tranquil evening, I found the clarity I had long sought after. My skin was not my identity, nor were those facades I once believed would validate me. No, my identity was carved through my stories of resilience, compassion, and love. As the stars twinkled above, I made a silent promise to myself to continue creating a space where the beautiful tapestry of our imperfect lives could shine bright, illuminating the path for others still navigating their own tumultuous journeys. I felt gratitude swell in my chest. We are meant to be seen, heard, and loved for who we are, every flawless and flawed moment in between. This was just the beginning.